All right. Hello, everyone. We are rolling right along here in Holistic Health Week. And you know, I said this on a previous Holistic Health Week that I recorded earlier today, but I realized they're not going to come out on the same day, so this won't make much sense. If you saw the other episode with Laura where my lighting was down, I'm also experiencing that today, but this is probably going to be spread out throughout the week. Good news is I don't really need much lighting today because our guest did prepare a really cool presentation for us. MaryAnn, the one thing I wanted to ask you, though, before we get into the presentation itself today, this is a question I've been asking on all the interviews, is, you know, when we talk to people in the functional medicine space, holistic health space, all that stuff, usually we actually can talk on a lot of topics intelligently, especially relative to the average person that does not spend all their free time studying this stuff, right? They got other interests and hobbies. So why is interpreting blood work the topic that you wanted to nerd out on today, enough so that, hey, we have a whole presentation on it? Why is this something you're passionate about?
Oh, yeah. And I came from the tech world, left my job, got into nutrition, but because I'm a techie nerd, that when they talked about blood work, I just loved it. And so I created my own spreadsheet and end up turning that into software that I have for practitioners. I started it for myself, but I'm sharing it with practitioners. So I just love blood work interpretation. That's my thing. I've been doing it for many, many years now.
Awesome. MaryAnn, this is what I always tell people. Everyone that comes into the functional health space, if we'll label it as that, everyone has different backgrounds and you just got to use your skill set. So that's like perfect for you. We have teachers come in and they're like the best coaches in the world because they're so good at educating people. So you come in with the skills you have and then here we go. Look at that. So yeah. I will bring up your slides here. And then if you guys are watching, and this is the first time you've seen a presentation in Holistic Health Week that has slides, basically I just disappear unless MaryAnn calls on me, and we will let you kind of do your thing. So take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Evan. I appreciate you having me on. All right, let me go here. Unlocking the power of bio-individual blood work interpretation beyond functional blood chemistry analysis. So we're taking things to the next level here, and I'll explain that going forward. So we know, and most of you know here, that there are three main steps to interpreting blood work. You first compare the results against reference ranges to identify out-of-range values. Then you look for patterns to identify imbalances and dysfunctions in the body systems. And then you compare those values over time for a single patient to look for trends. So we know that the reference ranges on the lab reports are way too wide. They're based on the results of sick people, mainly people who go get their blood work done. So they're taking 95% of that population and using those to come up with the reference ranges. So we know that, and what it is they call, that's a normal distribution curve. And that's why the term, they call them normal reference ranges. That's where it came from, the statistical term, but normal doesn't mean healthy or optimal. And we all know that. And so this is what they do in conventional medicine. Hey, your values at the low end of the range. Oh, look, everything looks good. Everything looks normal. You're in the range. And we know that's not a good thing to do. So conventional medicine is more reactive when they look at blood work. They wait until a value falls outside of the range in order to justify a disease diagnosis, which in turn justifies prescription drugs and treatments. It's just a money-making model, but not in our world. We have these optimal or functional ranges, these tighter set of reference ranges. And then if you can identify then if their value is in a lower or upper end of that reference range, you can do something about it before it becomes a disease or a problem. And in our model, then we're more proactive. We compare results to a tighter set of bio-individualized reference ranges that represent optimal health to identify imbalances and dysfunctions before they reach a disease state. And I put a little heart there because we are more caring and loving in that way. So let me give you the history and evolution of reference ranges and how bio-individual reference ranges have come about. And kind of coined that term. So we have first, like I mentioned, we have the reference ranges that very wide at 95% of the population. Then we've been introduced to optimal or functional reference ranges from different courses. And that's sometimes usually one standard deviation from the mean, because the lab ranges are 2 standard deviations from the mean. So you take those go one standard deviation from the mean to try to get a tighter reference range, then there's a more the next level of accuracy or more personalized level would be to have evidence-based optimal ranges. So you adjust those reference ranges based on different studies. And this is what I do in my software. We look at every reference range is backed up by a study. And so the ranges there, a lot of the studies are mortality or disease studies. So they, if you have your value over this number, you're more likely to have certain diseases or increased mortality. Or there's also really good insurance studies for life insurance companies that do, and they look at markers like, hey, GGT, if your GGT's over this number, or ALT, we may not give you life insurance. So really good studies and ranges and values we can get from that. And then another, even further, more personalized, is that we take these reference ranges and adjust them based on the bio-individual traits of your client, male or female. Let me switch to the next slide. I think I have the different. I'll tell you further in a slide coming up what the different bio-individual adjustments that we make in the software and what they are. But so at a high level, I'll go quickly through these, but this is normal distribution, like I mentioned. Lab ranges, 2 standard deviations from the mean represent the lab range. Normal is not optimal. We know that. And normal distribution example. So I use potassium as this example, where the lab reference range for potassium is 3.5 to 5.2 millimoles per liter. And we'll go to the next level. So then optimal reference range for potassium, taking 1 standard deviation from the mean, would be 4.0 to 4.8. And then taking it another step further, using different evidence-based studies, we can get even a more accurate reference range. So using this study here, a potassium between 4.5 and 4.9, people were at higher risk of cancer. So using these studies, we even have a tighter optimal range than what we would do just for 1 standard deviation. And then we can back up that information if anybody asks us where we got this range from. So in our evidence-based optimal max range, for potassium would be 4.4 instead of the 1 standard deviation of optimal max of 4.8 based on this study. And there's more information. I know it said 4.9, but there's more information in the study showing that 4.4 would be a better optimal max. And then bio-individual reference ranges. This is what we have in the software where we adjust reference ranges. We have so many different reference ranges for different age groups, male and female, different ethnicities, elevation. I'll talk about that one later. That's really cool. Different trimesters of pregnancy. The blood changes drastically in each trimester of pregnancy. And I have an example about that. Even when the woman after birth is breastfeeding, there's different markers change based on if she's breastfeeding or not. There's different ranges, especially for sex hormones during the menstrual phase, and even menopausal status has different reference ranges. And so doing this makes everything even more accurate. So this is what bio-individual blood work analysis is, why it's more accurate than just your regular spreadsheet or cheat sheet that you've used or gotten from different courses. I started out trying to do that and put all these reference ranges for each age group and sex and trimester in a spreadsheet, and it just got crazy, which is why I end up creating software to automate all this. Here's one example of a really cool adjustment that we make in the software for people who live at higher elevations. So there's many different people. If you have clients living in Denver, Albuquerque, Colorado Springs, they're living at a higher elevation, then you need to adjust those reference ranges, and I'll show you why. So first off, a lot of studies and everyone says altitude, but it's really elevation. And so altitude is, the distance from sea level to, say, a plane, but we're talking about people, individuals, and they live at an elevation, they're standing on the ground. They live at this elevation. And that's why I say elevation versus altitude, although you hear altitude a lot in different studies. So it's just a clarification there. So the reason why, so what happens is that as you go up in elevation, the barometric pressure is less. So you could see here at sea level, all the different molecules, there's 28 nitrogen, 7 oxygen molecules, but because the pressure is less, the molecules get less. So every breath that person takes, they're taking in less oxygen. So the body is so smart. What it does is overcompensates for that by the kidneys produce erythropoietin, which is the hormone that tells the bone marrow to produce more red blood cells. And so there's increased erythropoietin production and more red blood cell production as you go up in elevation. So what happens here? So that the kidneys sense, it's so fascinating. The kidneys sense that decreased oxygen. So it makes more erythropoietin, which then makes more red blood cells. And there's a study that I found that supports this. They took people at sea level, and you could see, for example, here, like their EPO, that's erythropoietin, at sea level was 8.93. And then they took them up at increased altitudes, and they measured their blood during different times of 8 hours, then day 1, day 2, and then they brought them back down. So you could see 8.93 erythropoietin, but as they started going up in elevation, it's 20, 27, 23. I forget which day they started bringing them back down, but you could see hemoglobin, the next one there, 14. Then as they go up in elevation, more hemoglobin, 17, 18, 18, 20. And then at the far right, return to sea level, you could see them coming back down. But it takes a few days. So if you had somebody that was traveling and went to a high elevation location, you need for them to wait about 7 days until they get back home to their elevation before you ask them to get blood work drawn, just because of this. And so we have this study where they've recommended different adjustments or increases in hemoglobin or decreases in the cutoff value based on different altitudes. So from 0 to 3280, which is 1,000 meters, we make no adjustments. But if you can enter in the software what elevation they're at, and then we'll adjust. If they're 3281 up to 4100, we'll adjust the reference ranges upward by 0.2 and then 0.5, 0.8, and so on. That's one cool adjustment. And so here it is in action. So if you had a 42-year-old female, because we have different reference ranges for red blood cells, hemoglobin, hematocrit, all throughout different age groups. But this is one example of 42-year-old female. Let's just say you didn't adjust her ranges upward for her elevation. You would assume that she has, anemia is unlikely for her. Her red blood cell, hemoglobin, hematocrit all look optimal. But then if you put in 5344, we make those adjustments, put those reference ranges higher. So just for example, you could see hemoglobin 10.6 at that lower lab min range. But when we adjust those upward based on the elevation, you could see hemoglobin now the lab min is 11.1. And so when you adjust those upwards, you can see now that anemia may be possible in this woman. So it's really cool. It makes things more accurate. And then the opposite. So this is what usually happens when you're looking at blood work for somebody living in a higher elevation. It always looks like they may be dehydrated because they're making more red blood cells. You think usually that's an indication of dehydration. But then if you adjust those reference ranges upward, you will not incorrectly identify that they have dehydration. Everything looks normal in that case. So that's one pretty good adjustment that you need to make, especially if you're working with people living in higher elevation cities. So here's a detailed bio-individual blood work in action using around anemia. What anemia we know is the process of oxygen delivered by all the red blood cells to every cell of the body anemia is really the one thing you want to make sure you have set first, because that causes fatigue. You're not getting that oxygen to all cells of the body. Your client has lack of energy. So you want to really get their anemia tuned in. And there's so many different reasons why, possible root causes of different types of anemia. And we have all that automated in the software. So here's an example. So the anemia related markers on the CBC, we know those: red blood cell, hemoglobin, hematocrit, and the indices MCV, MCH, MCHC, and RDW. And so what you do, the 3 steps in assessing anemia: you identify the likelihood of anemia using those first 3 markers. Then you identify the type of anemia using MCV, the average size of the red blood cells, and MCHC, the average of the amount of iron inside those red blood cells based on their size. And then you take it a step further and identify the possible root causes of that anemia. You really need to have that iron panel. Most conventional doctors don't order that. And you'll see why that you can't just go giving somebody iron supplements if they just have low hemoglobin, because there's different reasons why that could be happening. Then you look using other markers to identify possible root causes. So here's how it looks in the software. So we have, and because I went to Bowman College, I'm a nutrition consultant as well, and I know we're not allowed to diagnose. I created this software for FDNs and all my nutrition colleagues, all of us who are not allowed to diagnose. So I don't use any diagnostic terms in the software. So instead of saying anemia, I just say the body system process. So what's happening? It's suboptimal blood oxygen delivery. The red blood cells deliver that oxygen, and if it's suboptimal, that's basically anemia. So we identify the likelihood of that anemia using those first 3 markers. Then we identify the size using MCV, the color using MCHC, and then, so let's just say in this example, we don't have the iron panel. There's multiple possible root causes for this type of anemia, not just iron deficiency. I don't even say deficiency in the software. I say insufficiency. Everything, I look in the ICD-10 codes, and I don't use anything that's in there. So we don't get in trouble when we provide this report to our clients in case they take it to somebody in the conventional space. So if you don't have the iron panel, there's multiple root causes of that. But if you have the iron panel, I can narrow down the possible root causes even further with over 100 different patterns. In this example here, it's a sideroblastic anemia. And we don't say that, but sideroblastic anemia means heme synthesis dysfunction, the process of converting iron into heme. It's a complicated 8-step process. You need zinc and B6 to do that. And in this case here, in the pattern here in the top right, the iron panel, that pattern is there's enough iron in the serum, there's enough iron saturating the transferrin, ferritin's on the higher side, TIBC's on the lower side. That's a surrogate marker of transferrin. The liver's not trying to make more transferrin to pick up more iron. So there's enough iron there. This is a scenario where you would not want to give an iron supplement, even though the hemoglobin's on the lower side, and it's a microcytic hyperchromic anemia. Instead, we look at AST and ALT, and those are B6 dependent enzymes. And so when they're on the low side, you could infer that there could be a B6 deficiency. And so this sideroblastic anemia could be caused by a B6 deficiency, and you could help that client correct that anemia with a B6 supplement and not harm them any further by giving them an iron supplement, which is what their conventional doctor would probably do. So this is really cool too, how we adjust reference ranges for different trimesters of pregnancy. This is also around anemia. So if you have a 29-year-old female in the 2nd trimester at sea level, basically elevation less than 3281 feet, if you're not adjusting those ranges, you're using the sea level ranges, it will look like she has anemia. And we know that pregnant women, their plasma volume increases because their arteries vasodilate to bring in more water so they don't hemorrhage at birth, which means that although they produce more red blood cells, the plasma is so much filled up with water that it looks like they're anemic. So you have to adjust those reference ranges downward to account for this change. So if you select that client as in the 2nd trimester, we apply those reference ranges, and now those ranges move down. You could see hemoglobin up the top, say the lab min is 11.1, but if you adjust those ranges downward in the second trimester, that hemoglobin lab min should be 9.6. And see, now it looks like anemia is unlikely. Everything looks normal. Here's another twist to it. So let's just say this woman lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico at 6,991 feet. If you don't adjust those reference ranges now, before it looked like unlikely that she had anemia, but now that she lives at a higher elevation, now you got to adjust those reference ranges upward. And now a woman in the second trimester at a higher elevation, now anemia does look likely. So there's so many different combinations of adjustments that you really need to make to be more accurate in identifying anemia. And so, like I mentioned earlier, that we have over 100 different patterns in the software to help you identify the possible root causes of anemia. There's a normocytic hyperchromic, normocytic normochromic, macrocytic, all sorts of patterns. And this one, I tackled this one first because this is the most complicated one to try to help identify possible root causes of anemia. And also a nice feature in the software, I'll show you. So first off, the graphs, the practitioners that use the software say the biggest benefit they get, besides being it more accurate, saving them time in interpreting blood work, is providing that report of the client's values plotted on those color-coded bar graphs, because it helps the client see where they fall out of balance instead of looking at that LabCorp request report. It's so valuable to get that client bought into, where they are and how things then change over time. So we have a comparison feature where we plot up to 10 different tests for that one client in this table, but then we can compare the current test to the previous test and let them know with the thumbs up or thumbs down if their values are trending in the right direction. So the practitioners, they would get the blood work from the client, they'd either order it or get what they have, run their protocols, recommendations, maybe 3 months later, run another set of blood work, put it in here. And if you could show the client all these different green thumbs up that your recommendations are improving their results, they love that and that's your data. And this is I know there's all sorts of other functional tests, but blood work, everybody has some. It's the least expensive way to track changes in a person's physiology. And so if you can say, and also practitioners are using the software now as a way to attract more clients. Say, hey, give me your blood work, whatever you have, I'll put it in my software, give you this awesome report, and then help you identify your imbalances, and then maybe identify different tests that you may need to help us further define imbalances. And then when you're presenting that report and going over it with them, then that's like a sales opportunity for you to then recommend them your package or working with you going forward. So it's a nice, easy way to get people in and give them good data and impressive reports. And so in the software, you could do a free trial of LabSmarts. We have over 118 different bar graphs and patterns that we display on these bar graphs, and you get 2 free tests to try it out. And I talked really fast. We're only like 23 minutes in, but we probably won't take a live look. What do you think, Evan?
Well, no, this is fine because I have plenty of questions. This was great. This is one of the most wonderfully nerdy things I think I have ever seen. So it was totally cool to watch you go through this. And I'm actually really excited about this. And I mean that genuinely, because in my own business with my fiance, she's also an FDN practitioner. We've been seeing the validity and benefit of finding those easy wins. And you hit on a key point at the end. This is something every practitioner should be listening to right now. Everyone has blood work for the most part. I have never had a client that's come to me as an FDN that hasn't already done blood work with their doctor, usually quite recently, which is great. And then again, to your point, even if they haven't done it recently. It's not the most expensive lab test by any means. It's actually quite affordable to do this, even without insurance. It's still very affordable to do it. So I think it's cool for a variety of reasons, because we're starting to run into this issue where I don't think people are necessarily unwilling to spend on the higher packages, because we sell higher packages all the time. I think what happens is, as the space becomes bigger and bigger, people are getting screwed over, unfortunately. And they've spent tens of thousands of dollars sometimes on Western natural and functional medicine prior to coming to us. So when we can show them what we're able to do with low barrier to entry stuff, hey, let's just look over your blood work. Maybe you don't even, I mean, this is not how I would necessarily run my business, just throwing it out there for some people. If you already had, excuse me, the software like this, you could almost offer this on discovery calls, right? Like you could kind of tease out with people, hey, I see this. You don't have to give away the secret sauce on a free discovery call. That's a little crazy, and that's probably not going to fully benefit the client or you, but I could see that having huge validity. Excuse me. So I want to go back a little bit here, only because our Holistic Health Week audience is filled with a couple of different people. Some people are going to be definitely very well versed in this stuff, but then others are coming into this for the first time. And MaryAnn, I don't think they actually fully understand the difference between functional ranges and normal ranges. So can we just kind of, you talked about it in the beginning, but can we dive in a little deeper for someone that really does not get why Western medicine ranges might not be perfect? Can we just talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I skimmed over that, assuming that everybody kind of knew why the ranges on the lab reports aren't adequate. So what they do is they take the blood that's been drawn either at that lab or in that region or across the country, and they just do a 95% standard deviation, 2 standard deviations from the mean, to just take that population data and say, okay, here's the lab range. It represents 95% of the population that we've tested. Well, who goes to get their blood work done? Not too many healthy people. It's more people who are having issues. So you don't want to be at the upper or lower end of those lab ranges. And in the conventional world, they don't really care if you're in that lab range. You're normal, you're good to them. They don't want to deal with anything until it falls outside of that range. And most people are like, I came to the doctor because I have issues. I know I don't feel well. And you say everything looks normal, but I don't feel normal. So many people hear that.
I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with this, but I feel like this is something a lot of us learn about in like psych classes, even in high school, but definitely college. The one, just so people understand how big of a difference this can be too, the one bell curve that I think most people get to see is like IQ distribution, for example. So people might remember this, like the average IQ in America is around like 100 to 105. And the point of me mentioning this is just to show why the blood work thing might be a little bit incomplete. If you're talking about 95% of the population with IQ, for example, you go to that bottom part, that's like maybe 75, 80 IQ. You go to that upper limit, you're talking about someone with like 125 IQ. If all factors were the same, right? Looks, privilege, all that stuff, the person that has that 125 IQ is going to beat the other person at almost everything. So that's kind of a significant advantage in life. So my point is to like, not that these are perfect comparisons, but it just might be an easy one for people because they might have seen that before on an actual bell curve. It's like, if you said, oh yeah, everyone within this 95% group in IQ is about the same, well, that's not even close to true. That's not even remotely accurate. And I do think it's a good enough example for this blood work thing, especially when you consider, again, who gets blood work, not the healthiest people in the world. And second, how are we defining healthy? I think that's an even possibly bigger key here, because we all know Western medicine does not define healthy in the same way that, you or I may, MaryAnn. So my grandmother has had type 2 diabetes for almost 40 years. Now, she also doesn't take care of herself in other ways, admittedly, but when she first got that diagnosis, what they might say is, oh yeah, you're healthy. You just have type 2 diabetes and you need insulin. Well, in our world, and I don't mean this, this isn't a judgment or condemnation. I've been very sick in my life too. But I wouldn't say that's healthy. I would say,
Right.
no, you're unhealthy and you also have type 2 diabetes. Like we can put a label on it, but you're
Right.
definitely unhealthy. So if we're taking from these people that we would not classify as healthy in the functional world, now we know the numbers might really be messed up. So my next question to you, and by the way, I will minimize the slides if we should, but do you still have a couple more slides, it looks like?
Yeah, just two more.
All right,
Yeah.
how about this? And I'll shut up, and then why don't we do those
Okay.
slides, and then I'll reserve my question.
Yeah, I mean it's just the the salesy kind of stuff. Just these are the prices that we have in the software,
Cool.
which I try to make it pretty affordable. 25 tests a month, 29 bucks a month, or yearly, you get 2 months free, 290 or 590. And then 590 is the unlimited version. And then this is just a little bit about me. And then I missed the other slide. I also teach. So there's a FDN Lab Smarts. I've always had this with FDN. Anybody who uses that code gets 20% off every monthly or yearly subscription. And also, I teach a course to people who work with pregnant clients or people who are trying to get pregnant on how to interpret blood work throughout each trimester of pregnancy. And we have a live course coming up in May, and we have a promotion for that. I think the code is HHW150, and you get $150 off that course. And so
Nice.
that's the salesy stuff here at the end.
That's okay. And as I'm reading this, just so it's clear for people, because some might be watching on a phone and maybe it's hard to see. Not your fault. It's like obviously there's a lot here. What I'm wondering is, it almost seems like you can scale the price as your business gets busier. Is that correct? Because as you're doing more labs,
so you could do a pay as you go. A lot of small practitioners just starting out, they get to 2 free tests in the trial, and then they just buy 3 tests at a time until they get enough clients where they go, 5 tests a month. And then my bigger practitioners just do the unlimited.
I really appreciate stuff like that. And I actually think it's just a smart business thing, right? Because then as the person grows, like if I'm looking at someone who actually has a full-time FDN practice, that's like nothing per year to get unlimited tests. Because if this is how I was doing my discovery calls or how I was working with clients, I mean, you're going to be working with easily 100 plus clients a year as a full-time FDN. So
Right.
That's awesome. But the question I was going to ask before that I paused with is, in terms of getting these functional ranges down, I'm guessing, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is something that's probably going to get continuously better as we understand health more and more, right? So it's not that these ranges aren't much more optimal right now. I fully acknowledge that they are. But do you think that there's still room for improvement and that it will get better over time as we get more accurate data?
Yeah, as more people do studies using different blood. I mean, I have one that's called D-dimer, and it's a marker of a breakdown product of fibrin, which is used to help make clots. That has been recently identified as a good marker of long COVID and long backs, where they're seeing microvascular coagulation. So if you see a high D-dimer, that's something you might look for to help people reduce that clotting that they're experiencing. So I'm continually in PubMed, just researching, looking for more studies, more markers to incorporate better optimal ranges. Yeah.
Very cool.
I agree.
And I suppose that's true of virtually any lab, right? That's why it's an exciting space to be in, because we're going to get exceptionally good at this one day. Like we can get amazing results for clients already, but like we're going to get exceptionally good where we're really going to be able to pinpoint some stuff quite quickly and accurately in medicine. So it's kind of scary on one sense what we'll be able to do, but in the other sense, it's pretty damn amazing. I think.
And real quick, and as we go on in time, the lab ranges are going to continue to get wider and wider as our population continues to get more unhealthy. I've seen over time those LabCorp ranges are getting wider, so you don't want to rely on those for sure.
That's that's well said. So wow, the functional ranges are probably going to get tighter as we define health better, and the common ranges are going to get actually wider as they have to adjust for those 95% of people in there. Wow. Okay, definitely scary there. So I'm glad we have stuff like this. What are since we're not again diagnosing anything with this, what are some of I don't even know how to word it. Like if it's like practitioner testimonials or whatever, I'm just kind of curious about some cool stories, I guess, that people have used your software like this, whether it's for themselves or their clients. And yes, they didn't find a diagnosis, but they found stuff that they could work on. Whereas previously they went to Western medicine and thought they, oh, this
Yeah.
is it. This is all I have. I'm not sure if you have something like that
Oh
off the
yeah, I
top of
have
your head, but
two really cool examples
cool.
where one is a woman that works with pregnant clients. And if you get your blood work done as a pregnant woman, the ranges, I mean, the values are all over the place, and there's all these highs and all these lows because they don't adjust those ranges on the lab reports for the trimester of pregnancy you're in. They never ask. So she had a client, many clients come to her with their labs being so anxious and stressed out. Oh my gosh, all my values are out of range. And so she put it in the software, everything lined up, adjustments, everything looked, green and pretty good. And it just relieved her anxiety over the blood report that she had. So that's helpful just in itself. I mean, the pregnant woman has already enough to worry about versus, having to worry about blood work that's all over the place that freaks her out. So that was one cool story. And then another story is where one client was she had a microcytic hyperchromic anemia. Even in the example I was talking about, low hemoglobin, no iron panel ordered. Her doctor said, "Oh, you're probably low in iron. Why don't you go take a bunch of iron?" She was taking iron supplements, felt even worse. And then we get her information. We order an iron panel and identify that she was taking way too much iron and didn't need more iron because she had a bacterial infection. And so bacteria consume iron, and body is so smart that it keeps that iron out of the bloodstream away from that bacteria. So, it's not eating up your iron and it's not continuing to thrive. And so you can then deal with that bacterial infection. If you just give more iron to somebody that has a huge bacterial infection, they're going to get worse. So that's another example of just, being able to understand the blood work and the patterns and doing the right thing. I mean, that giving somebody iron supplement without the iron panel is pretty dangerous, really.
All right, that's awesome. I want to ask this one in a way that you still feel comfortable to answer with your full and true opinion. And the reason I'm prefacing it like that is because at FDN, we obviously have our foundational labs. I fully support them. I use them every single week with my fiance, with our clients. So we do believe in that. But I think in this space, it's very important to be objective and to hear different perspectives and allow people to come to their own conclusions, because no one has all the answers yet. Otherwise, we would have heard about that program or thing. We all have some good answers. We don't have all the answers. My question is, especially for a software as advanced as this, and with the accessibility of blood work, to what degree do you see the use and validity of other functional lab tests? And to where do you see the limitations, I guess, of the blood work? And so a more direct way to even say this would be, do you believe in other lab tests, or do you think you can do this all with blood work? And then if not, like, what lab tests do you like to see as well?
So what your blood tells you is really, it's really like a symptom. What's going on in your body. Blood tests will identify, the symptoms, or they're, they're not. It's not really the root cause thing, right? It's just, you have high neutrophils, low lymphocytes. You probably have a bacterial infection. Well, what do? You got to dig further in. I like to order organic acids tests and GI map stool tested, then figure out what those things are. Or, if you have high, liver markers, so it's just a first step, an entry into pointing you in the right direction for the next test. Cool. The root cause tests, like the ones that you guys talk about at FDN.
Awesome. I appreciate the objectivity. It's not an either or, it's a tool, just like many of these. Would you say then it's fair to say that the majority of the people who use this platform are using it for the reason that you just said, or the reason that we kind of both talked about, possibly even as a way to use in a discovery call or an initial consult to really tease what people can do? Is that the primary way this is being used?
Yeah. So if it's to get a baseline of where they're at, they definitely use blood work first. So then that blood work then points them in the right direction of what further testing they might want to do. I mean, there's blood tests like vitamin D. I mean, you know what is high or low, right? Or, you know, zinc or copper. And so there's certain nutrient tests. But when you want to get, you know, really deep down into nutrients, you go do something like a SpectraCell or Cell Science and really, you know, a real good micronutrient test, or even a hair tissue mineral analysis test or some other functional test to get more detail. And even same with sex hormones. I mean, blood's not the best way to test sex hormones, but if you had some, or you could do, you know, estradiol and testosterone just to get, you know, a couple high level markers. But they, you know, and people do that. But then if you see things are out of balance, you may go do a Dutch test or something more specific, or a saliva test for hormones. So it's not the only test that people use, but it's a nice entry level test, especially for you to be able to show your value by saying, give me what you have already. Right. I'll try to make sense of it in a way that your conventional doctor has never made sense of. And then we use that as a stepping stone, a springboard into the plan and the further testing that we do. It's never the end all be all test, but it's part of the discovery. Like you said, give me your diet and lifestyle history, your symptoms, you know, and give me the blood work that you had. And if you don't have enough though, let's order a little bit more. If you don't have an iron panel, we really need that. I mean, I always recommend that. If you don't have magnesium RBC, I mean, that's a good one to order, and some of the basic nutrient markers. And then you go further and figuring out, okay, why are these markers off? Because you're not going to, you know, blood's not going to tell you why things are off, but it just, you know, shows you what is off. And so then you take it to the next level.
I love the philosophy around this. This makes total sense to me. And one thing that should be said about blood work that really matters for everyone is it's pretty damn good at figuring out if something is direly wrong. So it's definitely something to use in that way. And I think having a testing system that is more sensitive to those potential really serious things matters, because to your point of, you know, the bacterial infections or overgrowth, what we've seen as FDNs is, okay, I've had bacterial infections like H. pylori that were not benefiting me. They were correlated with some of my symptoms like cystic acne and stomach ulcers even. But at the same time, I have to also be transparent and say there are going to be millions of people that walk around with H. pylori their whole life that are going to be fine. Whereas with blood work, if we use a simple marker like blood glucose, for example, if someone was walking around consistently with a 170, 180 fasting blood glucose, there is no person that is going to probably live a normal life expectancy if that's what they were really dealing with their entire life. So blood work's very powerful for these more severe things. And I think the fact that yours is set up in such a way that we can see these things moving in the right direction, hopefully before something major ever comes up. And even if something major was already there, you know, just working our way through that. I think this is awesome. So MaryAnn, if someone was silly enough to be listening only to the audio side of this today, or consuming it only on the audio side, and did not get to see these wonderful slides, can you just say verbally, where can people find you, follow you, website URL? That'll just be my final question for you.
Yeah. So where's the last slide here? Labsmarts.com is the website, labsmarts.com. And there's a button on there that you could start a free trial. And I just got a nice feedback yesterday from a user who's a regular user. He's a 75-year-old male who likes to track his blood work. And he said, I really appreciate your software because I know I'm on Medicare. I don't get the blood test that I need for Medicare. So I know I can go get blood tests on my own, and I put it in your software, and it helps me identify where things are in and out of balance for me to take my own health in my own hands. And that was so cool to hear that it's not just for practitioners. I mean, I would advise though, mainly practitioners use it unless you're a real astute, person that has really researched some of the blood work, because you need somebody to help interpret it. But really anybody can use it to track their blood work. So it's pretty cool. Labsmarts.com. Anybody can try it for free.
Nice. MaryAnn, thank you so much for being a part of our Holistic Health Week. This was excellent.